Government does nothing well. Now, that's a self-evident truth.
Hillsdale College has produced a number of graduates who have gone on to a career in public life, but the most famous was a charismatic politician from the Chicago area named Phil Crane. The 1952 alumnus was a rock-solid Republican, and he represented his Illinois congressional district for 35 years in Washington. In 1980, he became the only Hillsdale College graduate ever to run for president. Crane was a champion of conservative values, including lower taxes, a simplified tax code, free market economics, and the North American Free Trade Agreement. Crane helped establish the Republican Study Committee, the Heritage Foundation, and the American Conservative Union. John Wilson, who came to Hillsdale College as a professor of history in 1975, was a friend of the Crane family.
I knew about Phil Crane when I came here. I mean, he was in Congress by that time. He was 10 years older than I, but a lot of similarities. Another guy who was very, as I say, very family oriented, and not only with his brothers and his sister and that part of the extended family, but he and his wife Arlene had 8 children, 7 girls and one boy. He had been taught by his father. He said this all his life. Any chance he got, he'd been taught by his father to be someone who insisted upon freedom and independence and liberty and patriotism and all the good things that he thought our country stood for.
When Phil Crane graduated from Hillsdale in 1952, he didn't jump into politics right away. He served in the Army for 2 years, earned a PhD in history from Indiana University, and served as the headmaster of a school in Illinois. He finally jumped into the political arena in 1969 when Donald Rumsfeld resigned his congressional seat in Illinois to serve as Richard Nixon's Secretary of Defense. Crane won a special election to fill the seat, and as he quickly became a conservative champion in Washington, he kept his roots in Hillsdale.
So he was a constant presence at Hillsdale. He always wanted to help us raise money. He always wanted to do what he could to send us students, I would say he was on campus probably at least every other year, for some reason. And he used to join us in our road shows, as we called them, and we were, trying to raise the big money through the 80s, especially through the 80s. His family had a huge influence on him, and by the time he came to Hillsdale, he was ready to hear anything that he thought was truthful and good and beautiful. He always said this was the place where he learned to understand American history, learned to understand what our Constitution meant, learned to understand why he wanted to teach it. He was a extremely handsome and very charming man. He was somebody who people reacted to him always in the same way. He was always well spoken, and he loved to talk with people. And I think that it was a natural for his friends and people around him to look at him as somebody who would do well in politics.
Phil Crane's career was not without challenges. He had numerous political setbacks, and in his personal life, he faced a drinking problem, which he worked hard to overcome. According to Crane's nephew, Pete Ross, however, the biggest challenge he faced was the loss of his older brother George in 1956.
Phil Crane was the second of 5 kids. And so there were the 4 boys. George was the oldest, then Phil, then my mom, who was the only girl, and then Dan and Dave. And all 5 of them attended Hillsdale. George left during the Korean War. He left before he graduated from Hillsdale to go fly for the Marine Corps during the war. and he was killed in a mid-air collision over Glenview Naval Air Station in 1956. So Hillsdale awarded him a posthumous degree, but George was the leader of the pack, if you will, and of course he and Phil were like Irish twins. They were very close, and so when he lost his brother, that was a blow to the entire family, and that's probably the biggest challenge that he had to overcome for quite a while, to just get his feet back under him, because it destabilized his whole life was crushed because his idol was dead. And so it took him quite a few years to recover from that. He still continued through his education. Ultimately, I think, he met his wife in Chicago, and I think that was probably a stabilizing influence on him, because it kind of, pulled him back together, because now he had bigger things to think about than just his misery.
Crane's alma mater has at its mission that it will pursue truth and defend liberty. He studied the Constitution as every Hillsdale student does, and when it became his time to serve, Crane held an unabashed commitment to America's founding principles.
He knew that you had to work with people and work out things, but his first commitment, of course, was to the Constitution of the United States. And to him, that meant limited government. It meant that, above all, the United States of America stood for a law to limit law, a government that simply could not be allowed to have the kind of authority that threatened the liberty of its citizens.
In 1979, with Jimmy Carter in the White House and Republicans looking for the right candidate to take him on the following year, Phil Crane decided the time was right to run for president. He became the first Republican candidate to enter the race.
He's young, square-jawed, telegenic, but his campaign stressed issues over image. For in 10 years as a congressman from the Chicago suburbs, he's established himself as a pure conservative. His voting record rates a perfect 100% from the American Conservative Union. He becomes a yardstick against which to measure the 6 major Republican candidates who are called conservatives. Some Republicans say his pressure will keep Ronald Reagan from drifting to the middle. Others say he'll make Reagan look more moderate. Whatever the case, Crane was campaigning through the snows of New Hampshire a year before the primary. Knowing he was a long shot, he became the first announced candidate.
When it turned out that Ronald Reagan was also potentially interested, he said right away, if Ronald Reagan runs, I won't. I'll drop out. I think it's fair to say that he was a good Reagan Republican his last years in Congress.
In 2020, 6 years after he passed away, Phil Crane got the Hollywood treatment. An FX docudrama called Mrs. America came out, depicting the fight in the 1970s over the Equal Rights Amendment. Crane, who staunchly opposed the ERA, was played by James Marsden in the 9-episode series, including this real-life depiction of him interviewing Phyllis Schlafly on his talk show, Conservative Viewpoint.
Good evening and welcome to Conservative Viewpoint. I'm your host, Philip Crane.
But Crane was more than just a politician. He also dabbled in music during his days at Hillsdale. And in the 1950s, long before his time at Washington, he was a songwriter. He wrote one of the best-selling Christmas novelty songs of all time. It was called Little Sandy Sleighfoot, and it was recorded by country music superstar Jimmy Dean. Crane did the lyrics while the music was written by a Hillsdale College classmate named Joseph Savarino. It ended up selling more than 300,000 copies. Crane wrote the song in honor of his late brother, who always dreamed of putting the Christmas song of Sandy Sleighfoot to music, according to Joseph Savarino's brother, Troutman.
It's a story about one of Santa's helpers. His name was Sandy Sleighfoot, and he had feet that were 3'3", and he could ski down the hill without skis. So all the other elves made fun of him because he was so clumsy, when he was helping the toys, he'd trip and fall and break them all. Just everything went wrong. That's part of the song.
After a long and meaningful career in Congress, which ended in 2005, Crane died in 2014, 2 years after his wife of 53 years.
He had a tremendous appreciation for his roots, where he came from, and he liked to talk about it. And he was always willing to help.
He was really the same person. He had the same values. He had the same, future to look forward to that he attained, and he just was an outstanding person.